Good afternoon. Thank you for having me this afternoon. I appreciate the time. I'm going to be presenting a case study which demonstrates that buying local or localization is a tool that can be used to transform the economy and to empower those who are still on the peripheries of the economy. What we are as Proudly South African is a buy local campaign, and our mandate is built on the back of the fact that the country battles high levels of unemployment, high inequality, as well as people who live below the poverty line. A majority of our people live below the poverty line, and therefore, a buy local campaign was set up in Proudly South African through NEDLAC following the Job Summit convened by the then President Mandela in 1998 to try and come up with ways in which the economy can be transformed and in which measures can be put in place to grow the economy. And buying local is not something that is new to South Africa or is unique to us as a country, but it's a global phenomenon, tried and tested all over the world. And in fact, if you look at a country like the US, they have these legislations that talk to buying local. And in 1933, the US enacted a Buy American Act, which demonstrates that this goes back to many years, many decades, in fact, close to a century now. And they followed that up with the Buy America Act in 1982, as well as improve the Buy America Act in 2017. And all of this is aimed at reviving their labor-intensive sectors. And in fact, they rolled out a campaign a couple of years ago, which talks to the automotive industry, because the automotive industry in a town like Detroit creates a lot of jobs. And so when that industry was in trouble and was under pressure, they started a campaign to get Americans to buy that which is made local, so as to make sure that they revive this industry. And this is a campaign that did well because they were able to get their automotive industry back on track just with sales made within the borders of the US. And there's an example of a campaign. And this is how the campaign looks. It was spearheaded by Mr. Clint Eastwood, and basically they call it second half, where they are saying that they've made decisions that are wrong for the economy and they needed to start turning the tide. And they did this across various industries. And the unemployment in the US pre-COVID-19 started demonstrating the fact that their trade policies, which sought to give priority to products made in USA. And so if you look at the unemployment numbers in the US, this is all pre-COVID-19. They had an unemployment rate which stood at 3.6%, despite the fact that they had a population of about 329 million people living in that country. It goes down from May 17 to May 2019, where they were able to bring it to 3.6%. And this is simply because they had policies that sought to protect their labor-intensive industries. And if you look at China as well, because China has positioned themselves as a factory for the world. So if there's anything that is consumed anywhere in any part of the world, even if they do not consume it, they have policies that seek to make sure that they produce this, they subsidize those products for export to those markets and those economies that consume those products. And that's why with a population of 1.4 billion rands, if you look at the graph from July 2016 all the way to January 2019, the graph goes down. And with 1.4 billion people, they were able to keep their unemployment levels at 3.6%. Look at South Africa in the quarter one of 2020, and this is all pre-COVID-19. We had a population estimated about 59 million people based on the numbers that came out about a week ago. People living in the country, we have an unemployment rate of 7.1 million people. If you compare that with what I showed you a minute ago with the US has 329 million people living there, but the number of unemployed people is only 6.8. So we have more people unemployed in South Africa as compared to the US, whereas our population is just a fraction of that number from people living in the US. But 7.1 million people are unemployed in this country. 2.9 of those are discouraged. So you actually have a total number of 10 million people who are unemployed. But the expanded definition looks at 10 million people, whereas if you look at those who are still actively looking for work, you only have 7.1. So if you look at the most affected in the economy, women still account for 31% of those who are unemployed, and 59% of the youth remains unemployed. So it simply means that there is a need to start adopting some of those trade policies and procurement practices that are adopted by the likes of the US and China. We have, as an example, two industries that I'll show quickly. The first one is the furniture industry. The industry used to employ 50,000 people and only employs about 26,000 people when you look at the numbers at 2018. And if you look at those jobs, those are just direct jobs that I've showed you, but there are jobs in all these industries. And look at the ones that I've highlighted. The synthetic fibers or plastic derived from the plastics industry, and these are used by the textiles guys to uh, contribute raw materials that are used by the furniture manufacturers. If you look at the agricultural industry, it contributes natural fibers, hides and skins, and they're used for by those who convert this into leather and textile item for final production of furniture items. If you look at the metal industry, it contributes metal parts, which are also used by furniture manufacturers. And the chemical sector gives you paints, adhesives that are used to make furniture. So all these industries contribute to jobs in that industry. So every time you buy a furniture item, there are jobs lost across the whole value chain, and not just the 22,000 jobs that I've showed you that were lost in this industry over the last 20 years. So there are direct and indirect jobs that are impacted on by purchasing decisions. Another quick example is the clothing, textile, footwear, and leather industry, where there's about 1,600 factories that used to make clothing, textile, footwear, and leather items in the country, and only 900 were left as of 2016. And the reason for that decline is what you see on the right-hand side, where 480% increase in imports is what we saw for this industry. And if you look at imports from China, there was a 730% increase in imports from China. If you look at the number of people employed in this industry, you had 200,000 people employed in this industry, but that number was reduced to 90,000 in 2017. So just over that 15-year period, about 100 jobs were lost in that industry, and those are just the direct jobs. Remember what I spoke about when I gave the example on furniture, that there are indirect jobs that are lost across the whole value chain. And therefore, the focus area for the buy local campaign, which is Private South African, is to impact on purchasing that happens in the public sector, that which is bought by the private sector, that which is bought by the general public, as well as to promote accessibility of local products and services. There are products bought across all these pockets of the economy, and so our role as Proudly South African is to impact on buying that happens in each of these roles. So if you look at a quick example of what the role of Proudly South African is, if you look at designers and manufacturers, and I've predominantly used Black-owned companies or Black-owned design houses to demonstrate how a buy local campaign can help impact on empowerment. So if you look at David Tlale, Matosa Baila Duma, Ingatelia, as well as Indalo, they're all designers and manufacturing, the design houses and manufacturing companies that rely on retailers like Edcon, Edgar's, Jet, and the Foschini Group to take their products to the market. And so the role of Proudly South African in that whole equation, when you drive a buy local campaign, the role of the buy local company is to stimulate demand, is to educate those who are responsible for buying on the need for them to go into to choose locally made products every time they go into these retail spaces. So when they go into Edgar's, they must look for a garment that says made in South Africa, a product of South Africa, produce of South Africa, made by David Tlale, Matosa, and those guys, so that you then impact on that aspect of the economy. So these guys can only do well if there are people buying their products, and retailers will only put those products on their shelves if there is a demand. So the role of Proudly South African or of a buy local campaign is to ensure that demand is driven up from those who buy locally made products, those who buy products on a day-to-day basis, rather. And so how do consumers know that a product is Proudly South African, even made in South Africa, is to look out for the country of origin label. So that's why we encourage our members to use the Proudly South African logo on all their products. It's an identifier to make it easy for consumers to identify products that are locally made. Every time you see the Proudly South African logo, you know that it complies with this 4K criteria, that it contains local content, which means the product is made in South Africa, that it has high levels of quality, that it complies with environmental standards in the country, and that the companies that make these products comply with the labor legislation of the country. There's perception out there that the membership of Proudly South African is expensive, whereas it's not the case. If you look at the membership fee structure, those who have businesses that are startups and have turnover of less than 5 million rands, as long as they tick the four boxes that pertain to our key criteria, they pay 500 rands per annum, and it's renewable every 12 months. And the fees are based on a sliding on an incremental scale, where the most that any company will pay if they affiliate with us is 100,000 rands, and this is for companies with a turnover of 100 million rands and above. So companies between 5 million and 10 million pay 1,000 rands, and so it goes. So it's not expensive as is perceived out there. There are a couple of benefits, and I don't want to necessarily go into all of them, but just as at a high level, you can use your logo to identify your product as one that is locally made. You have access to market platforms that we make available to you. And some of these include free listing on RSA Made, which I'll talk about shortly, which is our online store, which is where consumers can then find your products as an organization, as a company that has invested and is making products. There are other opportunities that we put out for our members, including access to tender opportunities, where we find these and send them to you as a member. You can be included in the database of locally made products and services hosted on the Proudly SA website. We secure opportunities with buyers that represent a lot of entities that represent a lot of buying, and we facilitate a lot of business-to-business opportunities. All of it aimed at ensuring that we increase your opportunities to access markets. We also find expos and platforms where members can go and showcase their products, as well as joint promotions that we do with some of our members. In the public sector, and what we've done is we have used the legislation that exists, ensuring that government designates items, and every time they buy any of these items, they have to buy them from companies that make these products locally. And so these designated items are advertised, and every time they're advertised, we have a tender monitoring system that helps us track tenders for all these items. So let's say the item is a furniture item, a government department or any state-owned entity issues a tender for that furniture item. Our system will track the tender and will send it to those companies. We then identify manufacturers that we can send these tenders to, and they are then in a position to can respond. But while doing that, we also contact government to ensure that those tenders are only awarded to companies that are going to supply locally made products. So they must include provisions in their tenders that will exclude importers. We then also are able to ensure that the response that comes to government from bidders is from those who are local producers. So that way, as a member of Quality South Africa, we find tenders that we might have missed, and as a result, government then buys locally made products. So you benefit as a manufacturer. What we do in the private sector is we look at the localization commitment. So we go out and we talk to entities that make their products locally. So we go into the private sector, we find a localization commitment, and let's go back to my furniture example. We would go to the banks and we say to bank A, you buy furniture, can you give us a commitment that says every time you buy furniture going forward, you buy it from companies that make the furniture locally. We then go and we find and identify on our database capable companies who are able to respond to this call from the entity that has given us the commitment. So if it's a bank that says they will buy locally made furniture, we then give them all the list of furniture suppliers that are in our books. We send them the companies, then both the buyers and the sellers, the bank will then transact with furniture manufacturers. And we have a system that enables us to evaluate over time and monitor the products that are supplied to the banks, and to ensure that the banks, the suppliers or the manufacturers supply quality products or products that meet the needs of the buyer. So these are four quick examples of how we are able to succeed in doing this in the private sector. We are able to get commitments from local procurement from large corporates, like the banks example that I gave on local furniture. We're able to get the likes of Edcon, and going back to my example that I gave with David Tlale Makosa and them getting a shelf space from retailers. So Edcon, for example, when we started working with them in 2015, they only had 38% of local content in Edgar's and Jet. That increased to 53% in 2018, and we are now on a drive to 60% until Edgar's and Jet ran into problems that they ran into now with Edcon. We then also look at instances where big corporates buy raw materials, and the example we've given there is where Coca-Cola Beverages SA sources sugar from local farms, and they've agreed that they will find small-scale farmers, etc., that they can support, and that talks to raw material. I mean, if you look at South African breweries, which also works with Proudly SA, they buy their hops from farms in South Africa. So that those are new opportunities for small scale farmers who would have had to grow these products without necessarily having a market. We secure that by ensuring that we get localization commitments from them. The last example is where we focus on Black-owned companies, and this is critical because we go to the likes of Franchise Association of South Africa, who represents an array of franchisees, franchisors and their franchisees, where decisions on where the franchisee buys comes from the head office, or from which is the franchisor. So what we do is we strike agreements with them that says they will start absorbing new Black manufacturers or suppliers that can supply their franchises. So if you have a business in the township that is part of a franchise model, you are then allowed to buy from suppliers in your neighborhood or those that you can easily access. So that is what we do as Proudly South African. We also have an online store, rsamade.co.za, which I mentioned earlier on, and RSA Made basically houses locally made products, member products. If you're a member of Proudly South African, you join the campaign, you can list your product on there for free, and access to and it's an access to market platform. You're able to use this as a route for your products to reach markets. Free listing for you as a member, and companies that affiliate with us are able to list this for free, so consumers know that these companies have been checked for the key criteria, so it's high quality, it's locally made, and the system now has business-to-business capability, so you're able to even sell to other businesses if that is who your target market is. Another way that we have tried to support businesses that have repurposed during this COVID-19 time is we've created portals for face masks, for hand sanitizers, for detergents and disinfectants, and a new one that we've rolled out for face shields, where companies that make these products are able to list their products on the Proudly SA website, on the COVID-19 portals page, and any buyer in the private sector, and that is who we've marketed the portals to, is chief procurement officers and decision makers in the private sector to say, as you reopen your business, as you go back to work, go into the portals and find suppliers. You can find suppliers in your town, in your province. You can see how much capacity they have. So, for example, with masks, you have fashion designers and small-scale manufacturers who have repurposed their businesses, footwear manufacturers, clothing and garment manufacturers who, during this time, are making masks because the demand for masks exists, especially now that the president has said you have to wear masks at all times, and not wearing one in public spaces is a criminal offense. So that has helped us open up markets for new entrants, and this is how buying local, that spirit of them buying local, wanting to support local businesses, is now going to help sustain those businesses that are in this space, that have gone into this space during this time. We have even created portals for blankets and baby wear during winter, and that is where individuals and companies looking to buy local can go on our online store or even go onto our portals to find suppliers. We've rolled out a campaign, it's called 20, it's called Game Time, and basically what we say in South Africans is that it's time to make purchasing decisions that will help change the economy. And that is what we're doing to try and drive localization and buying local, so such that we can have an inclusive economy, we can transform the economy and ensure that new entrants are able to come in, knowing that this buy local campaign, as long as you demonstrate that you're making your products locally, the buy local campaign will open up markets for you and will ensure that your business can stay alive, your business can grow. So you can retain the jobs that are in those businesses, but you can create new job opportunities. And that is my presentation for this afternoon. Thank you very much for having me, for taking time to listen to me. Thank you.